Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm delighted to be here today with Sanjay Iyer. We're going to be talking about a resource that Umbrix has published called How to Analyze a Telecommunications Company. Sanjay is a member of the community, and he's an expert on the telecommunications industry. He has spent a couple of decades in the industry and done many of these analyses many times. We're going to talk about some of the specific analyses in the resource. If you want to play along, there'll be a link to the resource in the show notes. Sanjay, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Will.
So, Sanjay, maybe before we get going and through these detailed analyses, just give us a minute on your background to help orient listeners.
Yeah, sure. So I've been a consultant for about 25 years, from Big Fours in boutiques, and I spent about 20 of those years working for telecom, cable media companies like Comcast, Charter, more like internal consultant on some of their major initiatives in network, both on strategy and technology aspects of the problem. So over the years, I've seen many different evolutions. If you remember how television used to be analog those days, and where is it now? And it's been an amazing transformation, and was happy to be part of that journey. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let's dive into this. For a listener who wants to learn more about how to analyze a telecommunications company, we're going to get kind of down into the weeds and get real practical, not hand waving here, of how you'd actually do some of these analyses and some lessons from the field. I think the first one that you wanted to get into was number one on the list: network infrastructure quality and coverage analysis. Tell us about how an expert like you would go about doing that analysis.
Oh, definitely. So coverage is the first aspect of a network. What is your reach? How many homes can you deliver your service to in business establishments, right? And it all depends on your fiber, coax, your wireline route, and the way these networks are structured goes back to 30 years.
And what type of company are we talking about here? Are we talking about like a fiber internet company, a cable company, a wireless company?
Yeah, let me be clear. Yes, let's start with the wireline, fiber, copper. Usually they have a fiber infrastructure going into from a metro center to local neighborhoods, and then there's copper meets fiber halfway, and what you see is typically coax cable coming into your home. And nowadays you see a lot more fiber coming into the home. So there are different types of networks for broadband, specifically for high-speed networks. It's fiber to the home, hybrid fiber, coax, which is HFC network. And today you see a new entrance like fixed wireless access. So they run on fiber backhaul, but close to your neighborhood, you will see wireless antennas, and you will have a receiver at home, and you could get broadband speeds. And there's another new tech coming around on low Earth orbit satellites like Starlink that could deliver direct to your home. You don't need any connections to your service provider except an antenna, and it's communicating directly with the satellite. So there are many ways to reach the home through these kind of networks. But when we talk about infrastructure, I focus on either a hybrid fiber, coax, or fiber to the home, and wireless aspect is really a last mile or the last 100-meter solution right now.
Okay. And how would you go about assessing the infrastructure quality of a telecommunications company, where a wire line telecommunication? How would you go about doing that?
Yeah, so today, what's marketed is speeds. What's the upstream and downstream speed you receive at your home? And these are rated at megabits per second. It can go anywhere from 100 megabits to 1 gigabit, depending on the network. But remember, it's a shared network, so a lot of neighborhood homes are sharing one connection. So at times you may not see that kind of speed, depending on how many people are using television, what's the density of homes in that neighborhood. There's so many factors that go into that that determines your bandwidth. The next aspect is latency. So even though you might have a good solid bandwidth, most of the times you want to look at how fast you can send or receive packets, especially when it comes to video. The latency of the network is another factor, right? And between those two, I think it covers the systemic network design quality. And in spite of that, there are other issues, things like if you're looking at a coax network, it's actually like an antenna receiving many different signals from other sources, and there's always fluctuation, noise in the network. How it affects your service could depend on many things, overhead versus underground cable. So there are many things that go into understanding the total quality of a network. And some of these could be temporary issues, and you got to separate the temporary issues from the systemic problems that you see in a network. And that's where I think you have to do almost like every home at a home level, you have to measure the quality and not at the broad network level, in my opinion.
So, and let's put ourselves in the shoes of we are either a private equity firm or a larger strategic telecommunications company that's thinking about buying a provider with some number of subscribers, right, in some regional area. Would you mentioned a couple sort of outcomes of the network, like the latency and the speed. As if you're buying a company, would you primarily focus on those outcome type metrics, or to assess the actual infrastructure quality, is there something that you would be doing to look at, okay, what specific model and serial number and age of the boxes that they have, and where are those pieces of equipment, and how smartly are they networked together? Is there something where you'd be looking at the actual kind of hardware that they have?
Sure. Yeah. Before you get into the hardware, the first metric that they would look at, an investor would look at, is homes passed per mile of fiber. So that tells you something about your network economics coverage, basically, that says, oh, we have a lot more homes that could connect to the network per mile, more like a density factor, or it could be very few, which means it's economically less attractive than denser neighborhoods, right? So that's a pretty big number in most analysis, homes passed per mile. And then you look at the network infrastructure quality, right? So is it fiber, coax, and how it is engineered for speeds, and also, like you said, the CPE or the set-top box, what's called the customer premise equipment, is it outdated or is one of the newer models, right? And a lot of things go into how you can guarantee the bandwidth that you're marketing to those areas, right? So many things matter in that way. So if you think of a network, it's a collection, it's like a tree structure. And if your tree is congested in some areas, so you may not be able to provide the bandwidth that you're marketing. So there's a metric called households per service group, in the service per node in the industry, in the cable industry, that gives you an idea that are you provisioned well enough to handle like whatever speeds you're marketing in that area. And it has to be at a surgical level. There are hundreds of nodes in a zip code, and you have to look at every one of them and see, where you're good, where you need to split the nodes so you can accommodate more traffic, and those splits can cost money. And in some cases, you may not be even able to split. But what you're seeing today is a whole new technology coming. It's called dynamic access architecture, which makes a lot of these things more flexible and easier. And if you are buying a network in that architecture, I think you would probably be, future-proof for a long time.
Hmm. Let's move on to the next one that you had picked out. We're not going to do every one of the 47
Sure, yeah,
analyses,
right.
but
Yeah.
the capital expenditure efficiency and network upgrades. Talk to me a bit about how you would assess the CapEx efficiency.
Right. So this is part of a lot of work that I did in the past. It's about, these networks are built from 30 years ago, and they've been continuously being groomed and expanded to deliver more and more bandwidth. And there are many ways to do that. So if you look at the history of a particular network, you would see how they did it. The capital efficient way to do it or not, right? And if they did it the right way, and what is it going to take to get to the gold standard today, which is 1 gigabits per second downstream to every home? What would cost and how you're going to achieve that? It depends on where you are today. So those are the things that matter historically, looking at how they did it versus what is it going to take in the future, right? To get to that highly competitive 1 gigabits per second speeds, right? So a simple example, like I said, was a node split. A node split would be like somebody going in the field and separating a single strand of fiber into two networks, like one part of a tree turns into two branches, so you can deliver more bandwidth. Another aspect is, working in the head ends, what they call, where they bring in all the fiber optic network and grooming it there to provide more bandwidth. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, and capital efficiency depends on these levers that you pull.
How is CapEx efficiency even measured? Like, what's the numerator and denominator? And
Yeah, those days, I would say, how much would it cost to deliver an incremental unit of bandwidth? Let's say 100 megabits per second steps. Okay, so you're operating at a certain speed today, and how much would it cost you to increase it by, let's say, 100 megabits per second, right, in steps? And that will give you an idea, how capital efficient you are in this situation, right? There are other metrics, of course, the financial metric, how much debt you have on your network investments from the past, how you're servicing those debts. I mean, not talking about that. I'm purely talking from a network technology perspective. There are many things that influence CapEx efficiency there, right?
is this information publicly available at all on various telecom networks? So if you wanted to look up for some given network, you could actually, find out what sort of equipment they're using, or is this all mostly just confidential internal material? So the only way you could do the assessment would be to, if you're doing due diligence and they give you access to a data room.
Absolutely not public. Even for a large enterprise, it will be very hard for them to get this information accurately at a granular level. Some of my work was actually figuring this out through telemetry data, this kind of information, and I did some work in looking at data coming from devices, network devices, trying to understand the topology, trying to understand the traffic patterns, trying to understand how many customers are connected to that branch of the network, what speeds they're seeing, right? So there are techniques that you can do bottom up. What I call bottom up is looking at data to get this picture rather than sending people out in the field to inspect every element and see how it's hanging together, right? So it's a lot more complicated than most people think, and things change all the time. Networks are going through upgrades. In a large provider setting, there's no single database that keeps track of the topology and how it's structured.
So you're saying
So
it's
it's a,
forget about you're saying forget about publicly available. Sometimes you're
yeah,
saying it's not even internally available. Like the company,
correct.
there's no single source of truth where a company can even look up their own network.
Correct. It takes a lot of effort to get that right. Yeah.
Tell us a war story about, you know, you doing this in practice at some client. What were some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, there was a business modeling exercise for a very large network initiative, a transformation initiative. Um, it was about switching from broadcast to multicast video. And what that means is, broadcast video is very simple. If you have 100 channels and you're allocating X bandwidth for each channel, and it's pretty set, and that's all you can, you don't worry about it too much. You have the bandwidth to do it, you deliver it, right? But when it comes to multicast video, it is about, I can deliver more and more channels, but I only deliver the channel at that time if somebody's watching it in that part of the network. That's called multicasting, right? It changes the entire bandwidth economics. Now you're able to deliver like hundreds of HD channels, because nobody's watching most of the channels at that particular time. And so it was pretty good technology, but how to get that modeling right, because every unit of bandwidth is expensive when it comes to network capex, right? So how to get the bandwidth right, and people had to do some calculations, and there were assumptions made top down in the capex efficiency model that was said, we're going to assume X number of households per node on an average, and extrapolate it to the entire country, the national footprint, and here's a budget. And it turned out to be quite wrong. When I did the calculations, bottom up, we were way off, and it was not a good story to tell, because people have baked that model into their budgeting and planning, and here I am coming up with an alternative picture. So things like that happen quite easily, and that's why network costs are always, unpredictable and usually out of budget.
Let's jump to the next one that you picked, which was fiber optic and broadband penetration analysis. How do you go about doing that? I'm guessing it has something to do with you look at the neighborhood that you cover and figure out, how many homes have fiber, how many have broadband. But tell us about how
Right.
you do that analysis.
It's an interesting question, because this is pretty much become commonplace now. FCC, Federal Communications Commission, have put together a database at a national level that tracks every household in the country,
What?
and what speeds they're getting from which service provider they're getting. The service providers are mandated to provide that information and keep that up to date. So that's a service coverage map at a national scale. So imagine millions, probably 100 million, 200 million row database. And you can use, that's the first thing. That's an address level information. That's very rich.
And that's publicly available.
Publicly available, yes.
Oh,
That's
so
your taxpayers' money, right?
okay.
When they went into that. Yeah.
So
And
you could look up any house in America and find out what sort of bandwidth, what sort of coverage it
yeah.
has.
Oh, well, not by address. You have to be a service provider to get that access. You
Oh,
will
you
get a
do.
location ID, which means nothing to you. You can't, but it will tell you which, there's a way to decode where it is in a map
Yeah.
at a census block group level. So that's another map. It's all GIS based today. So you can carve out the entire nation into small census block groups, right? And it'll tell you how many homes, how many locations, serviceable locations are in that area. And for each location, what are the different technologies like satellite, wireless, fiber, coax, right? And who's the service provider? And what is their marketed speed to that location, right? So it's pretty amazing. And it was all done in the context of broadband equity project. It's about, expanding broadband coverage to every home, every household in the country, figuring out underserved areas and where to allocate government capital to those areas to subsidize the network bills there, right? So that was part of the project. So you can have a pretty good idea. But the problem with that, most of it is coming from a marketing perspective. So most people take it with a grain of salt. Like if I was a service provider providing service in an area, I would overestimate my coverage there because I want to attract my customers to my network in that area. So it's not really perfect, but there is a way to challenge your speeds, and that's another problem. So as a consumer, you can test your broadband speed and report what you're seeing at your home to this database and contest what your service provider marketed to you. So they try to keep that more like a crowdsourced solution to keep that database up to date, which is interesting. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit about get more into the customer side. Let's talk about customer churn rate and retention strategy. So we all know how hard it can be to cancel your service with a telecommunications player. They don't make it easy sometimes, but talk about churn rate.
Yeah, churn rate is a problem. So depending on whether you're a tier one big name service provider or you're a small operator providing fiber to the home, competing with the big names, you could see very different situations in terms of churn as a problem. So the way I framed it on a project was a customer churn rate propensity model. How likely is a customer likely to churn or subscribe to a competitor? And it's based on many things: your customers' experience with the service, how often they watch television, for example, and so on. And with the service provider, how many calls they get, how many technical issues they face, and how quickly it was resolved. And if you could put together a picture of all of these in totality, right, you will start seeing, some subscribers are going to be happy because they get good service. They didn't have a reason to call and complain. No billing problems, and they watch a lot of TV too, right? So those are high value. They are less likely to churn, and then you see other customers with other problems, and then you realize, you could provide something interesting to them, like a free video on demand, whatever that incentive may be to keep them in the network, right? In today's world, it's about competition a lot more. I mean, I'm talking about 15 years ago, 10 years ago, where there's likely not much competition for broadband. And depending on where you live, you don't have an option to churn unless you are trying to get a good a promotional rate that keeps you in the network for 2 years or so, and then you want to play games and get it back, and so you may say, I'm not going to use it anymore. So you come back and get a similar promotional rate. So there were things like that happening those days. But today,
so what you're saying is, as customers here, we should be calling up our provider and saying, "Hey, I'm kind of thinking about going to, the competition, Spectrum or Verizon or whoever the competition is. Do you guys have any offers to keep me or something?"
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, I mean, those were those days, right? People were never happy with broadband bills. It was always a creep happening every month. And anyway, today it's like a price war happening. So you see companies that are like Comcast, Xfinity, $30 per month for 200 megabits per second. And the reason they're doing that is because they are seeing a lot of churn today from mainly from fixed wireless access competition like T-Mobile, right? And so they're more on the defensive position right now, and they're going into price war. So what does it mean for smaller operators, right? Fiber to the home operators. They couldn't run a business model with $30 per month, revenue, all right? So a lot of things are happening today that's interesting than what it used to be 10 years ago, into the, competition, churn, um, and customer experience too.
Okay, cool. Let's turn to another one, the subscriber-based growth and market share. How do you analyze that? Like, how would you know market share in a given market? I guess you would need to know, how many other homes have fiber, broadband. Like, how would you get those kind of numbers?
Yeah, definitely. So it's all measured in perspective of your network footprint. Um, and like I said, the FCC database is pretty rich. So I would analyze at a small geography, like a census block group level, um, how many customers you can reach within the small area, how many of them are connected to your services, how many of them are not, and it's pretty straightforward math after that, to figure out what's your penetration. And, you know, here's where machine learning becomes very interesting to me, because it's like if you analyze at that level, you'll start seeing, and you blend in census data with demographic information for that census block group, you'll start seeing some, insights on who are your customers, and what's their profile, economic or household level profile information that provides you much more insights. And a machine learning model can predict or say, where you're underperforming, where you're overperforming, which areas, right, locations. And that'll give you some pretty good insight on where you need to amp up your marketing, where you need to compete on price. So that's kind of the work that I'm thinking about right now,
Mhm.
building out some tools around this.
Cool. Amazing. Well, Sanjay, thanks for walking us through some of these analyses. Tell us a little bit about your practice right now. What sorts of work do you do?
So yeah, I had a long history in broadband, or cable media telecom world. Um, what I'm doing now is diverse industries, but I'm focused on AI. I think I'm a believer, I'm an optimist about AI, making things better, especially for smaller operators in this business. Um, some of the work that I'm doing is using machine learning to predict ROI of a broadband investment. You're looking at analyzing the existing footprint, the geography. You're also analyzing the adjacent, locations, and trying to predict, your expansion path, and the ROI associated with each of those. So that's on the broadband side of things. I'm also involved in generative AI, more as a, how generative AI is popular, but how people are not seeing many of the use cases coming to fruition because, many issues with the current state of LLM tech, or the, adoption curve with Gen AI. So what I'm building is a governance model that looks at everything around Gen AI, from use cases all the way to production, and costs, and through more like an observability platform for generative AI programs. Um, I'm also building products with an AI first approach. What that means is using AI to develop product from the ground up, a software product, right? It's much more efficient, faster, and cheaper when you use tools like ChatGPT to write a code, based on your requirements, and it's a pretty powerful concept too. Yeah, so that's what I do right now.
Cool. And for listeners who want to find out more about what you're doing, where's the best place for them to find you online, if you want to share either a website or a LinkedIn URL?
Yeah. My LinkedIn is Sanjay-Iyer, and you should be able to see me right there. My website for my practice is called Combinatory, Combinatree. It's a complicated word, but yeah, you should be able to look me up on LinkedIn quite easily. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Thanks. It was hopefully it was interesting. Yeah.
And listeners, if you want to dive into the resource with 47 analyses on a telecommunications firm, you can go to umbrex.com/resources and then just look for the section on industry analysis, and you'll find the resource on how to analyze a telecommunications company. We'll include that link in the show notes. Thank you for listening.